there's a claim. Okay, there's a theist claim that's put forward, and I wanted to make sure this is put forward clearly, and I also wanted to do what I could to try to make it as reasonable as possible. I didn't want to misrepresent this claim. So I let theists make the claim. And the first person that I'm quoting from is a pastor, and it's Pastor Bobby Leggett in the December 23rd, 2008 Blanco County News, Focus on Faith section, contributed an article called "Is the Bible Reliable and Valid?" And I quote a paragraph from him where he starts out and he says, "Nobody would die for a lie knowing it was a lie. Many have died for a lie, but they did not realize they were dying for a lie. They thought they were dying for the truth." The irony, I just want to break into that, the irony here is that when I first read this, I thought he was going to offer that, this was a possibility in the martyr stories in Christianity.
Yeah.
But oddly, he rebuts himself with a valid rebuttal, but never really ties it into the idea that this could apply to his own claim. He goes on to say, "Fact is, all the apostles save John were killed for their preaching. Some were speared to death, some were killed with a sword, some were beheaded, and some were beaten to death. Why is this a logical and reasonable validation of the New Testament?" And pay attention, because this last sentence, he says, "The answer is they had firsthand knowledge of the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus." Okay, so what he's really saying is that nobody would die for a lie, knowing it was a lie, and because these people died, and because he's saying they claimed the resurrection, that means that they had firsthand knowledge of the crucifixion and the resurrection. He is saying outright that the claim is true if you're willing to die for it, and you believe. If you believe it.
He's saying that the only reason these people would have willingly died is because they knew that what they believed is true.
Correct. He's not saying it's just that they were delusional. He's saying it was true. And then I have Timothy Minnick, who contributed an article to, it was actually a site called bigissueground.com, and it has an atheist section, but the atheist section posts apologetic articles from different religions. And in this particular article, it was contributed as a Christian apologetic of the same martyr argument that says the greatest testament to their honesty was the fact that they were persecuted under the Roman government and died for what they believed in. People may die for the truth, but nobody would die for a lie that they conceived. Okay, so he makes it a little bit more specific, saying that you wouldn't die for a lie you made up.
Yeah, rather than a lie that... Well, see, that's the thing. The first complaint, or the first comment, and you pointed this out, where he says many have died for a lie, but they did not realize they were dying for a lie. Basically saying they sincerely thought that they believed the truth, even though it turned out not to be the truth. That's a valid possibility with regard to the various claims.
Right.
And he, of course, ignores it, chucks it aside, as you pointed out,
like,
to say that it must be true.
It's almost like saying everybody else's martyrs could have fallen victim to this rebuttal,
but not these guys.
But not mine.
Yeah.
Mine not. No, I'm immune somehow.
And this guy goes on to, as you point out, to narrow it, that nobody would die for a lie that they themselves conceived, rather than a lie that was foisted upon them.
And the last apologist is a Reverend Dr. N. Graham Standish, September 7th, 2008. It's an online sermon, and at the blog I give his link. He says, "This is one of the reasons years ago that I decided the resurrection must have happened. Otherwise, who would die for a lie? These were people who had a passion for the message of Christ, who were willing to take up their crosses daily to spread the word, who go into strange lands, traveling hot and dusty roads with little money, into lands that are unsafe and where they could easily die a painful death. All for a lie? ? So his point is the resurrection must have happened, because who would die for a lie?
Yeah.
So they had to have been telling the truth, and the truth they were telling couldn't have been delusional. It had to have happened. That's this claim. I am not misrepresenting this. This is out of the mouths of an apologist. So I put down that according to, when I sort of churn this claim down and say, here's, hone it down, let's see what they're saying, I think it's a fair assessment to say they are claiming if a person knows their claim is a lie, such as a claim someone made up himself, it is impossible that person would die for it.
Now, if that's true, then that means that there are two possibilities. Everybody who dies as a martyr believes they're dying for the truth, and either they're correct or they're incorrect. And now, we're not accepting this premise. As a matter of fact, Tracie's getting ready to demolish this pretty much. The idea that nobody would die for a lie. But given their premise, their objection is that all martyrs, anybody who willingly dies, does so for something that they believe to be true.
Correct.
Okay? Even if that were true, that tells us nothing at all about whether or not they were correct.
Correct.
And in every single example here, from these Christians in particular, it is a matter of nobody would die for a lie, therefore it must have been true. No. You've got this non sequitur there. You don't think anybody would die for a lie, therefore they must have believed it.
Right.
You can't get from there to it was true.
Right.
And what they try to avoid this by saying, well, we're talking about eyewitnesses who witnessed this. How do you know? I mean, you have no reliable way of figuring out what anybody saw or whether how these martyrs died and what was in their mind at the time.
And we're gonna
you
get to
don't know
that.
about the events that went on.
Yeah.
It was
Absolutely. But I think that's a fair statement of their claim. If a person knows the claim is a lie, such as a claim someone made up himself, it's impossible they would die for it.
Yep.
I mean, that's what they just said. And I had to, in this blog post, give 3 examples right off the bat that contradict that and say, I will make these examples not like make them immune to addressing the claim. I'm going to say I can give 3 examples right off the bat where a person will die for a lie knowing it's a lie, but I'm going to say that I already know what the objection is going to be to them. So I will waive them due to the objections I know are coming, but I will also say that according to the claims as stated here, they rebut it. And this is the first one, coercion. And in coercion, this would be a situation where someone who knows you is being interrogated. They name you as someone who is running around preaching the resurrection. You get arrested, and they start torturing you, saying, confess you preached the resurrection. You refuse to confess that you preached the resurrection. They keep applying torture. And finally, to get them to stop, you say, okay, I was preaching the resurrection. I believe in the resurrection. I'm guilty. And then they, instead of being lenient and stopping torturing you, they sentence you to execution. In a case like that, you would be put to death on a claim of a resurrection, and you would have died for a lie that you made up, that you agreed to, at least, a lie that they were accusing you of that you agreed to, and you died for it. The next one would be very similar to that sort of coercion, where you're being tortured, where you actually know that they will execute you if you admit to it, but you also know that there's nothing you can say that's going to get them to believe you that you weren't preaching the resurrection. So you ultimately just say, yes, I was preaching the resurrection in order to stop the torture and be quickly executed. Or even slowly executed. You want it to end. It's not going to end until you admit it. So you admit to what they're saying because they will not believe you. They think they've caught the right person, and they're not going to let you stop, and they're not going to stop until you admit it. The third situation would be one where someone reports to the authorities that a person in your house is preaching the resurrection. You know it was your child who's involved with Christians. You lie and say it was you. You're arrested and executed. You just became a Christian martyr who said there was a resurrection, who died for that lie. So, I mean, right off the bat, I can think of 3 rational examples where a person would do this, a healthy thinking person, not even a sick person, but a person who's thinking rationally would be executed for a lie regarding the resurrection. This can happen. It's not something that would have to require someone to be sick, and it rebuts the claims down the line. But I also understand that the claim of the martyr resurrection Christian story is that, well, they were out preaching that they were, talking about the resurrection. They got arrested for that. They were then asked to recant, and they were told they'd be executed unless they recanted. They wouldn't recant, and then they were killed. So they're going to say this is different than what we're claiming.
Yeah, in these scenarios, somebody is
kind of the opposite.
Changing what they've said.
They're admitting to it because of coercion instead of denying it. So I understand the objection, but I'm going to say if you don't accept these examples as analogous to what you're talking about, then you need to fix your claim because these rebut your claim.
Yeah.
And so you need to find a different way to state it because as stated, it doesn't work. So anyway, I ended up saying I'm going to list these examples as examples that show that the claim as stated doesn't work, but I'm going to throw those examples out. I'm not using them as my reason for saying someone would die for a lie. The so after that, I say that in order to help you restate your claim in a way that's a little more reasonable, let's offer that nobody would voluntarily and without external coercion or pressure offer a false confession to a capital offense, knowing it was false, up to and including something he himself manufactured. And I think that's probably as fair as I can get. And does that sound reasonable to you? As far as the claim and how it would discount the...
Up to this point.
Yeah. Up to the claim, based on the examples that I just gave,
right.
to rule them out, you'd have to restate the claim like this.
Yes.
Okay. So
I think I'm getting ahead of you, but
okay.
I'll just sit here quietly and enjoy.
All right. So then I have a disclaimer in here, which is kind of what Matt's been, I think, chomping at the bit to get to. I was a little bit torn about making this blog post because I didn't want to give the impression that I'm accepting that there are claims where someone preached the resurrection, they were arrested for preaching the resurrection, and they were tortured for claiming a resurrection until they recanted, and they didn't recant, so they were executed. I do not mean to imply with this post that I'm responding to that because I think it's a real claim, like it's a true claim. I'm simply saying I don't even care if it's a true claim or not, because in the end, at the end of this post, I don't even think it's relevant whether or not there are such people.
Right.
But for the record, it was interesting because the only martyr I could really think of that I remembered ever, reading personally was about Stephen, who was executed in Acts 6 and 7. There's a story about Stephen, and when I went to look that up to see, why was he arrested and what happened, and we need to understand this is like a very narrow subset of martyrs. This is only martyrs who could have lived during the time that the resurrection might have happened. They have to have claimed that they were there and saw it, or at least that they saw Jesus killed and then they saw him alive later. They have to have something that was in their claim that says, yes, I was an eyewitness to the fact that he came back from the dead. Then they have to have been executed only, in the situation that they would not have recanted. So we have to know that's why they were killed. This would be a very specific martyr that would demonstrate the truth of the resurrection if the claim was true.
Right. So
with regard to Stephen, he actually was killed upon claiming that it was the Jews who murdered Jesus. So he was martyred for claiming Jesus was murdered, not for claiming Jesus resurrected. And I just want to make that clear that we're not talking about a huge group of martyrs. We're talking about very specific martyrs for which we would need some very specific details about their trials.
There's a bit of inflation going on when people talk about this. They say, "Oh, you've got countless Christian martyrs," and claim number one is they couldn't have all been wrong. They couldn't have all died for a lie, and then they'll try to cite specific claims about eyewitnesses, and it's good that you're pointing this out, that of the potentially possible claims of eyewitnesses, there's this many.
Right.
We have this much evidence actually about this many, and yet they try to use this to establish a basis for that many.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing with Stephen that was interesting is
people listening to the audio, I made gestures with my hands that went from small to big.
It said that Stephen was actually arrested for lies, that somebody lied about him, and that's why he got grabbed. So Stephen wasn't even arrested for resurrection preaching. He was arrested based on false accusations against him, according to the story, and he was executed because he said Jesus was murdered. So there's nothing there that would be useful for a resurrection. To validate a resurrection from, like, Stephen's martyrdom. He would be a martyrdom that would be not a resurrection demonstration.